Today, my special guest is John Whalen. He has a PhD in cognitive science and is the author of the book Design for How People Think. He leads insights and innovation at Brilliant Experience, where he's guided global brands and innovated well-funded startups to deeply understand their customers, validate business opportunities, and bring successful products to market. Initially skeptical about AI research, John has since conducted extensive AI versus human studies to identify when AI-enhanced methods outperform traditional approaches and where human judgment remains critical. Thank you so much for joining us today, John. You're doing amazing work enlightening professionals and organizations on the evolving workflows with AI. How are you holding up? How are you doing?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on your show. And yeah, I think we all, have this sort of angst in UX research of just how are th things are changing so fast, and how to keep up. And honestly, it's sort of an evolution for me where I felt like we at Brilliant Experience were behind and really studied it, and we kind of studied it so much that I wound up actually generating the course to share, our learnings and to get other people up to speed on what's possible with AI and kind of how to do it, UX research, thoughtfully with AI rather than just saying, just do everything. But so I think it's a mindset shift, and I think I'm still working on it. But it's I see really interesting opportunities for researchers, for product teams, and so on. So that part's really exciting.
It is really exciting. For myself, I should let everyone know I just completed being a member of your second cohort. So I've taken the course, and I went into the course thinking I had some experience because in my previous role, we had AI assistant search into our repo. We were using it for some synthesis with big databases. We were saving ourselves tons of desk work time. Uh, and then we were also using it for summaries, and it was really
Mhm.
great for making our repo instantly accessible to anyone in the organization with citations. So I was loving it, but I was being very critical about what I was allowing into our workflows. So I took the course thinking I kind of understand a lot of this stuff, but it was very eye-opening. There's like 140 tools that have come onto the market with extremely broad-ranging
Mhm.
features and abilities. So I still have a lot more to learn, but it was so valuable, and I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing and leading there for us. So thank you for that. I'm curious, what are some of the most common questions you get from your cohorts today?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's should I trust any of these things, right? And I think that goes back to sort of a mindset, again, a mindset shift that, we as UX, if you're a through and through researcher like me, you kind of think, hey, I've got these human skills that I work with other humans, and that's really why I'm doing this. So now you're telling me you're going to have an AI between me and the person, either the AI is moderating or is coming up with quote unquote insights and so on. And so I think people are really like, is this thing just hallucinating? Should I trust it? How do I know? And really, that's actually part of the reason we did work. I set a blog posts on our website at Brilliant Experience about AI versus humans. And we actually did do the research of here are human researchers doing the work, here are humans with AI support, and here's things like AI moderation, and just looking head to head at how they were doing. And we just found that we were getting such a high proportion of those same insights with, say, AI moderation, that it just changed the game for us. Then suddenly, if we're using that tool, we're can do things at scale. We can do things in many languages. We can do things overnight with 100 interviews being recorded and so on. So I know your question started with just what are the kind of questions we get asked, but I think another one is just what is the range of tools that's possible too. And so you kind of alluded to sort of having an eye-opening experience, and we did too as we were studying the different things really broadly to give everyone, your viewers a sense. There are tools that allow, obviously, there's ChatGPT and other things like that that you can really use quite powerfully. And learning prompt engineering is really helpful with that. But there are specialized ones that are really interesting. Like there's some that help you make synthetic users in a Miro board or in a Figma so that you can interact with them and talk to them. And even, we work with stakeholders with that kind of thing. There are tools and many other uses for synthetic users. We can talk about that in a sec, maybe. There's this notion that you can get AI to conduct interviews, not just unmoderated interviews, which we're probably familiar with, but where they ask follow-on questions and they're sort of really interacting with the person. And that's really new, and it's only been out for maybe a couple of years tops. And then there's all these categories like you described of the synthesis tools that help you really speed things. Um, and sort of there are those at different scales, like for an individual set of interviews, for a large scale repository, for even bringing in all your customer data, like customer service requests and social listening and app store reviews and so on. So they're like different major categories where it goes from just collecting the data to analyzing one set of data to a large body of, say, UX research to everything your organization has. And then on top of that, this notion of the synthetic users and agents and so on. So there's so much that it's perfectly natural for all of us to have a little trepidation or not know where to begin or to be overwhelmed. And so part of me teaching this class was actually my clients asking, can you please help me understand the lay of the land here? And so I tried to simplify a little bit for us to all, really.
Well, it's changing quickly, and there's a lot of surprises and unexpected things that popped up. Um, my mind is racing based on all of the things that you just mentioned. But one thing that surprised me, and it's a simple thing, is an interview, or it's almost like a survey, but it's an interview. It's like, okay, we're
Mhm.
blending the lines between surveys and interviews. Even in the
Right.
tool interfaces, it feels like I'm preparing a survey, but it's an interview with an AI agent. And I've taken those interviews, I participated in them. I've also given them to others and made a few observations.
Hmm.
I'm surprised by how unbothered um, the participants are
Mm.
talking to AI in their sessions. It's even my tech averse, the people who hate tech who participate in them, they didn't mind. They didn't mind at all. And I was really surprised by that. Um, any surprises in terms of interaction with AI,
Yeah.
uh,
So
either agents or in surveys that you came across?
yeah, we actually so there's two pieces that you're speaking to, and probably many more. But one is there is this really interesting new opportunity. We all came to this from 2023 land of saying we're mixed methods researchers. We do some maybe qualitative interviews. We understand maybe what this new market might be. We do more scaled surveys. Those bring up interesting points. We come back with a set of interviews to really dive into what the why behind some of that survey data. Um, so we can kind of turn that on its head a little bit because we can suddenly do, say, 200, 300 or more um, interviews. And so this is not my term and I don't want to be stuck to it, but some people are starting to talk about qualivays, and I'm like, that's nails on a chalkboard still to me. But the notion is it's really a blend of you can get enough data to be qualitatively relevant, sorry, quantitatively relevant, but also get that qual data. And then you say to yourself, oh my gosh, I got 300 interviews with all this open-ended data. What do I do? And so that's where this one-two punch of AI that allows for scaled bringing in of the data and AI that can actually help handle that scale of interview open-ended data makes it really interesting. So that's just a new possibility for all of us that we're all trying to figure out how to do. Um, the
I will
second piece, oh yeah, go
I,
ahead.
I will say I feel strongly, and I'm sure you agree, it doesn't replace, you know,
Right.
connecting with people, showing you how they're trying to be successful with your software. Like
No,
you
yeah,
still have to have that in place, but it can accelerate you to the insights you require for a research study in ways that are pretty mind-blowing.
yeah. So, I mean, in our work, I actually give a talk about this sometimes that we went if you think about a large scale, so we tend to work with the very big companies. So think of the largest search engine in the world. You probably guess who that is. Um, we would do things with them, and you would meet with stakeholders and align them, and then you'd create the test plan and sort of get back and forth on that, and then start to do recruiting, and then schedule interviews, reschedule them, get them all done, then start to dig into the data. Anyway, that process was typically about, for us, around 7 weeks to do a really large scale study. Of course, if we were doing 4 interviews, we can do them in an afternoon. But it's sort of the larger scale things that we would do for, you're deciding if you're going to have the next unicorn and you really want to invest big, you're thinking big. So anyway, the moral of the story is as we looked at every step in our process and said, where could AI be used for this to simplify, to speed things up, to provide more power, etc. We actually reduced our 7 weeks to we now can do things in 7 days. And I just want to say that it's a real difference for what we as the researchers do. So what we do is essentially collect the data in the first few days. And then a lot of that time is devoted to what we would normally do, which is really digging into the analysis, really thinking through what this stuff means. In some cases, we have AI powered assistants helping us, but we go all the way back to the interviews or watching the videos and so on to make sure we're still connecting with that. We also, very often, depending on the client, some want it just as fast as they can. Others say, no, like let's make sure we get this right. And so we might do 20% of the interviews in person as well. So, there's a blend you can do now with that as well. So there are really interesting properties of that because now we can be, we've talked a lot in research about inclusion, and this is the interesting thing where my, Finnish and Singaporean is not as strong as it should be, nor Thai, but this allows me to get input from many different markets, super fast. And so I do think there's ways that we can actually use this to get data that would inform decisions that we wouldn't have otherwise. So
Mhm.
that's whether this is perfect relative to human interactions, it's still giving you things that you had zero of before. So the odds are that's a strength. Another thing is we can get some answers. Maybe they're not as perfect as that 7 week process, but product owners are like, okay, well, I have this deadline to make this big decision. Give me data or don't. And so historically, they just wouldn't because it would take too long, too expensive, and so on. And now we can offer a solution to that. So not surprisingly, we offer all the ways of working at Brilliant Experience, and really 90% of our work or more is using the AI tools to get answers faster. It's not a shock that product design, designers, owners, investors, so on, would rather have the large scale, fast turnaround work and have us continue to analyze that than go slower and more. It's just, an order of magnitude more expensive because there's just so much more human time involved in making that work. So
Yeah,
I think that this is coming, that there's sort of going to be this demand to work differently as researchers.
that's right. I think a couple of observations I'd love you to just speak to if they resonate with you is uh, something that I've had success with in my career is gathering a customer advisory board and having these
Mhm.
sessions with a group of customers from a specific type of persona or whatever the product managers need intel about and
Mhm.
bringing them together for a workshop session. And they love it because they learn
Sure.
from each other as much as we learn from them. And I think those kinds of live events are a great complement to the changes in how UX research is happening, where we have maybe not as much daily contact with our customers and we're using these AI tools. I see that as a great way to balance that and to give uh, product teams, especially the intel they need when they need it. So that's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is like, is there going to be a marketplace, like a marketplace for AI for UX? Like, we need someone to create us a bunch of personas that have all of these characteristics and maintain them and then change them. Is that going to be a service we're providing as a third party, as internally?
Yeah.
It gets you thinking.
Well, these things are in their literally in their infancy, and I don't think there are many that are launched. I don't know if any are launched yet, but I know many of these tool makers. So one of the things we haven't mentioned is I actually interviewed a set of the major tool providers for UX research and research in general. And so in those interviews, I asked them, kind of who's your product for? Can you show me a demo? And then where do you see this industry going? And then obviously off camera, we have a little conversation too. And so those interviews are on Brilliant Experiences YouTube site. So you're all open and welcome. I feel like that's a karma thing where if I can share these out and everyone learns, it'll come back. Um,
It's
but
working and they're very valuable. I highly recommend them.
oh,
Yes.
good. Well, uh, so the thing that we're hearing, at the end of that interview or off camera is they want to make it so that all these inputs that you have, say social listening or other, so let's go consumer for a moment, but it could certainly be B2B. Um, if you have the social listening, say you have a review of your app, you have maybe customer service requests, whatever, all those things could be folded into dynamically adjusting these personas, right? So it may be that the tool can essentially maintain it. That's the goal. I literally don't think I can show you one group that you can hire that does that yet. But I think that's certainly what people are working on behind the scenes.
Oh, thank you. Very interesting. I have a question here for you that's prepared in advance, and it's what are the four things every researcher should know how to do with AI?
Yeah, well, and I do periodically have free talks about this too, if you want more information. But um, really, these are things that should be familiar to you, Kathy. So, one is that I was absolutely skeptical of the prompt engineering and was like, blah, blah, blah. And then I actually looked into it more thoughtfully. And, like all of us researchers, sort of like, ah, and then, or I hope you don't do it as much as I do. But then I sort of reflect. And so, prompt engineering, I think, is one piece that is incredibly valuable. So, in our course, we talk about things like, meta prompting, which is actually to create a prompt using a prompt. Okay, so you're actually getting the AI to help you construct a way to talk to it that will make it more beneficial. And there are lots of things that we as humans just don't think of that an AI really needs. So even getting it to ask you a set of questions to build up a prompt, there might be things that you wouldn't expect you have to put in there that make it produce things better. So that's one. I just encourage you to learn prompt engineering generally. The second is all of us that do qualitative research, and actually quant too, it sort of behooves you to learn, practice, try these AI moderated interview tools because it's such a game changer of multilingual, fast scale, really fast turnaround times, cost savings. So there's so many opportunities with that. I think it's going to become more prominent. And so understanding how to design a test with that, understanding what it feels like. We can come back to that note you had, Kathy. We actually just talked about this yesterday with a group about is it a net positive? Is it going to be an HR nightmare for you? Like there are all these questions people have, but I think that's one of them. The other is just I'm used to just listening to every interview start to finish and starting to make post-it notes and affinity diagramming and so on. There are tools out there that expedite this process for you and knowing kind of when you're willing to trust them and when you're not, like it's still an ongoing process. But learning how those things can help you scale, I think is super important. And then lastly, this notion of these synthetic users, which is, like those dynamic personas. So if you can talk to this persona as opposed to just staring at it on a, pretty deck, there are really interesting things that you can do that may not constitute data or like collected insights, but can help guide where you're going. I think that's where I think of it as a helper, not a definitive thing. And just for everyone who is reasonably skeptical about AI, I want to remind everyone everything you're seeing right now is the worst it will ever be. It will only get better. So imagine, you saw ChatGPT and it wasn't, it was okay, but not great, what, a year and a half ago. And now it's pretty darn good and can make all these Ghibli style, images and so on. Um, so what would these tools for AI look like in a year and a half, benefiting from the power that these things change? And so we've got to just think to the future and be sort of future ready. And that's part of the reason why I started doing this class is I saw people that were like, oh, I'll never use those things. And I didn't want them to be, Blockbuster or you know, making horseshoes. I want them to be really valuable in their organizations and adapt. And there's people, I got my PhD when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and for people like me, it's important harder to shift. And so I also thought from that perspective too. So
That's
anyway,
great. It is a difficult shift because there are real ethical considerations to be
oh, sure.
involved, to be considered, and to navigate and to not contribute to harming or stealing content or things like that. So I think it's reasonable to question and to try
Mhm.
everything. I would say the course was so great. And it was so nice to have a cohort of people to go through it with. I learned as much from the people in our cohort as I did from the structured learning and getting to actually use a lot of tools. Uh, I guess my question for you, John, is what do you think is holding researchers back from embracing AI? And why is that transition so hard? You and I are kind of dinosaurs,
Mhm.
and like change doesn't always get easier as you get older. But um, what do you think is the main thing holding them back?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably two pieces. One is, we have this we thrive, we have energy that we get from human connection as UX researchers, right? I can tell you about an interview I had in 2014 that was like, oh wow, I remember this person and they like cried on my shoulder after the meet, like, that was cathartic. And so, you really feel the data. It's like you feel the emotion and so on. And so who would want to let go of that? And so, and also, I think that's actually a weakness for the tools now. They can change, but I think there's that piece that fundamentally this is different. I think there's a fear, of course, and I went through this. Am I still valuable? Like, where is my role? So if this thing is going to interview people and then say what the answers were out of that, like, for the product people and stuff, do I even have a role?
Yeah.
And if you love, I love actually interviewing the people and really understanding how they think. I wrote a book called Design for How People Think, makes sense. And uh so you if you're getting so detached from this and you become more an administrator or an orchestrator of the set of tools, it's not the same thing as it was, right? And then certainly there are a lot of people who feel, I'm a PhD researcher. I want to do really excellent research. I want to do really well thought through, structured, thoughtful work. And so if this AI is doing it, is it anywhere near as good as me? Is it really thinking about this like I would think about? And so I think that, having an AI do something, you're like, well, it just can't be like me. It can't have the context I have about my organization. It can't have the context that I have about the humans that are in this world of say, I did stuff in like international tax research for M&A tax people. Surely it doesn't know as much about that. And so it's going to be the interview is going to be worse, and we're not going to get to that nuanced finding we wanted. And I think my key point to everyone is just to try these things in a safe environment. It doesn't have to be with your data. It doesn't have to be in your industry even. It can be just trying it so you get a feel for, oh, it's capable of this and not capable of that. And actually, you mentioned getting value. I'm really glad the course was helpful to you. But specifically, I wanted everyone to get that sort of aha, oh, it's pretty good at this. But oh yeah, I caught this thing here that was a little weird. And that's normal and to be expected. And just like if you had a junior researcher under you, you'd be like, okay, they're going to have these strengths and weaknesses. So I think that not rejecting it out of hand and understanding that there's this fundamental change where we're going to be more detached from the day to day of interviewing people, of listening to every interview, whatever it is. Um, and the reverse is true too, that we're going to get access to things we never had before. We'll get all the years of data are suddenly accessible, and that you don't have to have the person that made that PowerPoint deck from 2021 and tell me about this deck.
Yeah.
You can actually go and get that data. And there are tools like Marvin, for example, has an interesting feature where you can say, give me everything that's related to this point, or give me the most recent stuff related to this point. So if the context is ChatGPT and post that, there's probably a fundamental difference in how people are doing work or living their lives. So that might be really important, but getting that sort of contextual data or scale can also make us much more impactful and tell a better story to our stakeholders.
Yeah,
So,
data interrogation was a term I learned in the course.
mhm.
You want to talk a little bit about what
Yeah,
that
so I
might
mean,
look like?
it's really there's sort of two flavors of data. One is just like, is it actually quality data? But that's a little different. In our case, what we're talking about is essentially asking questions of the data. So think of ChatGPT, but it's only laser focused on this set of interviews or this hundreds of interviews. Um, so and just actually going back to fears people have, some people have like, is it just going to make stuff up? I've heard about these hallucinations. And so you can actually, one of the things that AI is designed to do is be a little creative so that if you ask it for a number from 1 through 10, it won't say 7 every single time. It'll sometimes say 4, sometimes say 6. And it's built stochastically, and we can get into the nerdy stuff here about the temperature and annealing and all that kind of stuff. But it's built to be a little bit dynamic and flexible so that you can do more things with it. Now you can tune that as a tool specialist with a specialized thing to say, I do not want any, interesting new creativity from you. I just want my data. And so it can actually be very hard coded, limited to what is it that it has got from, say, the set of interviews. So it's not getting it from just general knowledge. It's not getting it from somewhere else. You can limit it, and that's great, actually. That's what we as researchers really, really want. We don't want it making stuff up. In addition, we humans still have to look, and it says, this is a major issue. Great. Well, now we can click on that and see here are the 17 interviews that are related to that. And then on top of that, here's the point in the transcript it thinks is relevant to that. So let's go look at it, and we're not going to trust it. We're going to trust but verify. And so, but think about if you had 300 interviews and you had to go back and find every time someone talked about marketing at your company, you go crazy, right? So you have to remember the 2 or 3 times that are in your head. Maybe look at the last few interviews that might be relevant. But in this case, now suddenly I can get a much more comprehensive view. That's
Mm.
actually less of my bias. Um, so another piece for the researcher is, oh, well, why can't that marketer just type this into the tool so they don't need me? So there's this whole democratization side that I know is nails to on chalkboard to many people, but if you can basically tell a tool, and we were talking about this AI moderation, it doesn't just do that. Essentially, you say, here are my business goals, and here's my target audience. And it can actually, with both of those, do the recruiting for you. It can set up a test plan, an interview guide, and it can basically do all that for you and come back with a report. So if you're a designer or a product owner who's never done an interview in your life, you can go ahead and get some data. So I do think um, there will be more and more of us of the non-researchers doing research. And also there may be actually, interestingly, we can scale our research so we could do much more, but at the same time, we have all our past data much more accessible. So maybe we can get answers without going out and doing specialized research,
Right.
So it might be that we more keep up our database of knowledge than we do, here's WIM 23 from stakeholder 4
Right.
that we have to deal with.
That's something I've definitely observed is we can look at our existing research first. We may already have the answers to the questions, and maybe we just need to talk to a couple customers to um, make sure we don't have any gaps in that understanding today. Because,
Eh,
teams change, people leave, intellectual property
mhm.
disappears, and it's crazy. I think you're right about the role. As a UX research leader, I was often, peer reviewing research questions for someone or helping like people who are just a little less experienced in doing research
Hmm.
structure their interviews or define what their research questions are. And I think it's just the same thing, only we'll be doing it at a larger scale with more impact. um, People will get immediate recommendations better from us,
Yeah,
but we're still going to be held accountable to doing quality research. Like I would love to see all these tools uh, with a really good research plan. Like
yeah,
like let's like design a research study and let's like run it through all the tools, the same
right.
one. That's we never have to. Well, maybe that we were just experimenting, so the
Hmm.
research study isn't perfect, and maybe they're never perfect. But do you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah,
quality of your research and the structure of your questions, and your ability to see if it's a really valuable thing to do.
yeah.
Those things still
Well,
matter a lot.
sure. And a couple pieces there. So one is you said, "Oh yeah, I often, review more junior researchers, interview guides, things like that." So now that person before they come to you can both say, give me recommendations, ChatGPT, on ways to make this better, but they can also spin up a synthetic user and ask the questions of one or more of those kinds of synthetic users, and you might be surprised. Oh, I'm getting answers I wasn't really intending on, so maybe my question's a little ambiguous. Or, oh, that seems to be coming up again and again. I better be ready in my interviews to have that come up. So I actually think there are interesting ways that we can make those junior people more powerful, and for that matter, save you a little time by getting more polished using these AI tools, not as the data themselves, but as a tool to prepare, to polish, to be well informed. So what
I
we
would do it
typically.
myself. Like I don't have all the answers. I got gaps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And historically we would do, oh yeah, our first three interviews are sort of learning our questions right. Are we, maybe this can really save a lot of that work and we can actually have those people be valuable participants as well, or as valuable and not sort of a learning step into getting to the good stuff. So I think there is that piece to it.
Oh, I love it. It's an exciting time. It's a terrifying yet exciting time, right? Wh what are you learning now to get ready for the next big thing in research? Is there anything because your cohorts are they're you're beyond the cohort level. Like
Hmm.
we're learning, we're experimenting, and you've talked to all of the founders of these tools. Like, what are you learning now to get ready for the next big thing in research?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. And I'm still learning just like everyone else. I guess I do have a little more background because I've just, we've done more studies and comparisons and that sort of head-to-head test like you're talking about. Um, so there's this notion of that's got a the term is so fuzzy right now, but this notion of agentic AI. So this is that you can essentially have and maybe this is the way to think of it. Generally, the rather than say, oh yeah, ChatGPT has these special GPTs that I can get that are sort of specialized tools. Well, that's just one thing that runs through a linear process of stuff. And in contrast, you could have something that both has tool use. So I could imagine it getting access to interviews. So that's retrieval augmented generation. And then there's a whole nother layer of that of how do you structure that data. But um, it can have both tools and autonomy to go do stuff. So imagine you've got something that does nothing but look for sentiments in all of your interviews. Maybe there's nothing that look, but there's another one that's a heat-seeking missile for usability issues in your product, or marketing challenges or consumer frustrations from this aspect. And so you could constantly have things running through really large scale work. And then on top of that, these things can kind of talk to one another. So we normally would build one deck that is our research report. right? So there's no reason why we couldn't have had, you know, synthetic, essentially, an agent that represents um, marketing strategy or brand strategy or accessibility, and really have each of those lenses that we look at all our data and bring out interesting things. So I do think increasingly groups are just starting to let you have a little bit of this, and it's such a, again, another layer of new world that people aren't quite sure, what would I do with these things? How do they work? How do I set them up? How do I know they're good? Um, but we're going to get there where you can say, I would like to know this. So the example you gave was a stakeholder asking for a specific question. What if they could get an email every week with the latest updates on that? So
Mhm.
there's no reason why that's not, that little agent couldn't do that homework and do that specific thing. So then you start to think, how do I have my sort of army of support agents that build up what I'm doing and always look at it from different angles? Like you were talking about inclusion, for example, or accessibility, or bias in what I'm doing. So I think that actually, so this notion of multi-agent systems, and you can look to, now this is when we start to get into like Python and like dev kind of world of things. But there's a tool called N, the like number, and then the number eight, and then N and 8N. That's one of these things that's meant to be very low code or no code to be able to do this kind of work. There's another one called Crew AI, and interestingly, they have an AI system where you can say, I need a crew that does X, and it builds it. It's not always perfect, but it's getting there. So there are ways that these will get, again, think in 2 years these will be much simpler to accomplish. So I think you're not only going to have this suite of tools you're building a single process with, you're going to have an army of these agents that are going to be helping you out as well.
Makes me think of how important shared language and taxonomy is when you're talking
Yeah,
about, um, insights and
yeah.
customer experience.
And actually, to that point, this is like some of the nuance that I want your listeners looking for. So, some tools that are on the repository side have what they call like auto tagging, where rather than have the humans, we used to have someone sort of dedicated who pretty much would go through and say, this is a usability issue, this is a marketing thing, this is a product onboarding problem. Um, so there are ones that just kind of do it. And there are others that actually you can give it quite a detailed description of, in this circumstance, this counts, in this circumstance, it doesn't, and in this other circumstance, ask me kind of thing. And so even if they both say, yeah, we do quote unquote auto tagging, there can be this dramatic difference in how they approach the problem. So unfortunately, I'm telling you that not only do you just try and tick boxes of did they have this feature, but you have to dive in a little bit. And so a really interesting feature some have, for example, that's really relevant to many people in our world is like PII extraction. So taking, something that looks like a social security number or a health condition or other things and sort of neutralizing it in the data so that you can never, I've, I remember having one client who figured out which, participant this was and then gave them a call because they were really interested in the interview. And of course you're not supposed to do that. Anyway, they were doing it for all the right reasons, without knowing sort of how we worked as researchers and the trust and stuff that we were building. But we would very much want there to be, a cleaning of the data. And the other thing I can tell your users sort of blanket is you'll want to look at each individual thing, but they really do have the highest levels of security now for the sort of enterprise apps. And they are thinking none of them, so that you can ask questions of the data and it works with your data in your data sphere. So I think that's I don't know if we're going to talk about data lakes and have a bunch of lakes or something, but um, the key point here is that your data is never training their model so that, Pepsi's data isn't helping Coke, for example. They're
Yeah,
all distinct islands because you're a paid customer and that's what you would want. So there's
right.
no way they would build a business that blends those. So just that's another thing people worry about.
Yeah, that's
J
important. You don't want to be, losing its intellectual property of the
Yeah,
organization.
so there are, it's a really multi-layered thing where we wind up helping our clients and we suddenly wind up talking to procurement, talking to the legal team,
Yeah.
recommending here are the maybe four systems that we think you would be best suited to you. So, for example, there are some things that are just great at analyzing, a set of interviews, and then you go and do another set, and it's great for that. And there are others, like I said, that are really that sort of enterprise model, bringing in data from so many sources that take integrations and other things. So categorically, they're sort of different ones. But
Have you run into any, and
mm,
we're gonna wrap up the session here, but have you run into vendors who are making sure or overlooking vendor lock-in? Like, can I get a backup of my
yeah.
repo and things like that? How are they handling that?
Yeah, certainly, as you might imagine, like I'm just going to take a group at random that I don't really know as well, but like someone like a Salesforce, you can imagine it's a lot easier to bring your data in than it is to get it out on average because that they've got all sorts of incentives to get you to bring it in easily. Um, The other thing that's interesting is they would, especially in repository land, you've built up these systems to maybe with these agents, for example, to auto analyze things a certain way, to code the data in a certain way. So you'd have to try to recreate the equivalent in the new system. So this is a tough one where I think essentially you can think of these as you're learning what's possible. If you're the person in research ops buying the tools, you'll really anticipate that, yeah, I don't know how long this will be around. I don't know how long until user testing buys this tool, etc. So we're at the stage right now where there are just a zillion little guys who have like under 10 people and have a very impressive tool because of AI. But it does seem really ripe for let's pick these three out together. Let's get a great one for synthetic users. Let's get a great one for um, bringing in data with these moderated interviews. Let's get a great one for analysis and
Enterprise
bring it together.
level, all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there isn't, in eye tracking, there's Toby, and they have like 80% of the market or something. And same in even when you're looking at, so this is something very different than doing these remote tests, but doing like heart rate and galvanic skin response and like facial emotion detection, like Affectiva has a lot of that, for example. But in this world, it's very spread out right now, and there isn't like the market leader really
Mhm.
in any of these things. So it's an interesting, really, really dynamic, space,
It is.
which unfortunately makes it hard to buy. But
It is.
so
Well,
yeah, so I'm
thank
Canadian, so I'd say so. There you go, eh? Um,
you. Well, where can people sign up for your courses and join a cohort?
oh yeah, sure. So this it's maven.com, and you could just look for Whalen. And my course is titled AI for Customer Research. So I think it's actually not quite. I think it probably hit second page of Google, but it'll get there. So you'll be able, if you say that with Whalen, my last name, just like the large mammal with an N, you'll get there.
And of course,
So
your book, Design for How People Think, is a staple for.
yeah, we haven't touched that at all, but we've been focusing on AI for collecting data and research, but thinking about the user experience of AI, I do think that especially because these things can be like co-thinking, help either a research partner in our case, but for your end users, if you're creating AI tools, going back and looking at a little bit of cognitive psychology is actually really helpful because we want to know what things people want to offload, how they want the AI to represent the information to them, and what decisions they're trying to make. And it really goes back to if it's sort of off in the way it's representing things, it would be so off-putting or untrustworthy to them and so on. So matching that's why there are humanoid robots that they're working on so hard because A, the world is designed for humans, but B, we can kind of understand how to relate to that. And so that's the same idea with AI design right now, which is a whole different, we can have another discussion another time about that.
Well, thank you. I will put a lot of great links in the show notes for everyone, including the link to your book, the link to all of your interviews on YouTube with the founders of these
Yeah.
tools. It's really interesting. Amazing people doing amazing things, frankly.
Yeah.
And then brilliantexperience.com is your agency where people can hire your teams. What else? We've got some book recommendations from you, A Brief History of Intelligence, Thinking Fast and Slow, and Co-Intelligence by Ethan Malik. Is that how you pronounce his
Yeah. So
name?
actually that's probably the first one I get you to buy. The second one will be my book, but the first one is this one called Co-Intelligence. And it's got this notion of when do we want to be? So they talk about cyborgs and senators, and I won't dive into too deep, but the moral of the story is senators are sort of half human, half something else. And they're that in that case, it's like the analogy for AI is you AI go do this, I'll go do this, and we'll be all set. The cyborg notion is intimately entwined, like, give me this data, I'll say this, you respond with that, and you're working together. And so his concept, his big sort of book idea is to what extent do you want your AI experiences you're building to be one of those two or somewhere in between? So I do think that that's a new way of working. Historically, we've always said, like, click to something over on our screen or even talked to it like Siri and then expect something back. But it's a very like back and forth. And in this case, it might really be it helping to direct you and you doing things back. But it's a more partnership kind of perspective that's very different for the experience. So I think his book is great. He did the work on the folks at Boston Consulting Group, who were some of the first to use GPTs, and they were looking at the performance of consultants with or without.
Mhm.
And I think it's good work and really interesting findings. So,
Well, thank you for that. That's fantastic. And thanks for helping propel professionals and businesses forward through a better understanding of AI products and services and keeping it human. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate your time.
of course, my pleasure. And yeah, good, all you UX researchers, I felt it too. We're going through a transition, but we're going to be okay. And we're going to have new things we can do that we never could before, and we only wished we could.
Thank you.